Good afternoon. Welcome to the Islandmagee Witches project launch, which is taking place here at the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. Today's speakers are going to be Andrew Sneddon and Victoria McCollum, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, both from the Ulster University. Before I invite Andrew and Victoria to speak, I just want to give a few of the ground rules. You all should have been muted, but for some reason some of you haven't been. So I'm going to, I think the folks who have just arrived haven't been muted, so I'm just muting you, and that's just so that we're not distracted, our speakers don't get distracted. The talk today is being videoed, it is being recorded, and we will put it out on the PRONI YouTube channel in due course. This is part of a range of events and talks that PRONI organises across the year, details of which can be found on the PRONI website. So it's now my pleasure to invite Dr. Andrew Sneddon and Dr. Victoria McCollum to talk to us about Islandmagee Witches. Thank you.
Sorry about that. There we go. There we go. So do you want to kick off then, Victoria?
Yep, sure. I'll start with sharing the presentation. Andrew, maybe you can kick off with a wee introduction there.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. We are, you've heard us, Dr. Sneddon McCollum, and we are the project leads or the principal investigators, whatever you want to call us, you know. And we're going to talk to you today about our new project. You know, I'll hand you over to Victoria.
Yeah, I think it's really, really exciting to be here. So this is one of my first times at PRONI. And you know, it's a really kind of fabulous location. It's on Titanic Boulevard. We're really excited to be here, and it's, you know, a wonderful project. So yeah, I'm just going to keep admitting some people here to the waiting room. So sorry if this is a bit ship-shape. So yeah, Andrew and I have been working on this project for some years now. It's been a big deal, especially through the pandemic. And we feel really, really proud, I know I do, Andrew, to kind of bring this project to you. And it's very much still a work in progress. The website's ready to be launched, but some of the tools on there are a work in progress. And I guess just thanks to our partners, so Connected NI, PRONI, obviously, Ulster University, and our colleagues who we'll be mentioning as we go, especially Karen Reid, the Faculty Impact Officer, and others who we'll mention later. So yeah, Andrew, want to start?
Okay, so what we'll start with is the history, you know, and this came out of this project, you know, to bring the history of Islandmagee Witches to life using technology. It comes out of historical research, basically, over a number of years. And so what I'm going to just do quickly is just talk a bit about the Islandmagee Witches, just, you know, a very brief overview. And then I'll talk a wee bit about, you know, the history of witchcraft, again, very briefly. Then we'll move on, you know, and talk about the project. And I'll talk a wee bit about the evolution of the project as well. So you get a bit of background of where this is all coming from, because, you know, probably 12 years ago, you might not have heard of the Islandmagee Witches, but you know, increasingly through my work and other work, you might have heard of it, but we're just showing you what this new project's about. So today is the 311th anniversary of the trial of the Islandmagee Witches. I'm just checking my watch, it's 25 to 1, okay? So the trial started at 6 o'clock in the morning. This is just at the point where the witches have all been given their evidence, and the two judges are summing up at the end of the case to the jury, who will go out and deliberate and then bring in the verdict. So this is, you know, this is history, 300 years ago. Just think about that. So I'll take you through that. So it starts in February 1711, and it happens in Islandmagee. It's an 8-mile stretch in the peninsula of northeast Antrim, and at the time it contained 300 people of Scots descent. And the elderly widow of the Reverend of Islandmagee, John Haltridge, Anne Haltridge, was living in the house, and she was basically being tormented by demons and ghostly phenomenon, and she dies in late February. Everybody thinks witchcraft. They don't say who it is. They don't know who it is, but they think that. Enter Mary Dunbar, who is depicted there in her graphic novel. And Mary Dunbar finds a bonnet on the ground. She unties it. It unleashes all the demonic activity again, and she becomes demonically possessed. And it's like, Victoria's, a cinematic art lecturer and a horror lecturer, and it's like The Exorcist, basically, and just vomiting household objects and things. But she doesn't blame it on the devil directly. She blames it on 8 women who are, she describes, who are hunted down, who are brought, who are tested. They're jailed under the 1586 Irish Witchcraft Act. And on this day, 311 years ago, they're convicted of witchcraft. Now, it's their first offence, so they're only given a year's in prison. I say that a year in prison in 1711 is not good. And 4 times in the pillory on market day for 6 hours, where they're pelted with anything you want to pelt them with. It's meant to all finish. It doesn't finish. Mary Dunbar continues on with the possession. She blames the husband of one of the witches and father to one of the witches, so it's actually a witch family. And she says that he's continuing on the attack. He tries to escape. He's brought back. He's charged. But just at that point, Mary Dunbar dies, and it took ages to find this out, but she dies. And so, by extrapolation, he was accused, prosecuted for murder by means of witchcraft and executed later. So he's one of the few witches of Ireland to be, executed. So this comes from, oh, thanks. Yeah. This comes from, my historical research, into the witchcraft in Ireland and the Islandmagee Witches. And in the middle there, you'll see Possessed by the Devil, which is basically, the main book on the Islandmagee Witches from a historical perspective. And it was actually launched in PRONI in 2013. So it's a kind of homecoming from it. But this was part of a wider project to look at Irish witchcraft, to say that actually Irish witchcraft did exist. There wasn't many trials. There was only a handful. There was only 4 out of 50,000 that happened in the early modern period across Europe. But it was still important to people. And there were some trials like the Islandmagee trials. And I also, looked at witchcraft as well in the book there, Witchcraft and Magic and Representing Magic. The fact that witchcraft belief survived in Ireland among ordinary people up to the mid or later 20th century, it actually had real world consequences. People in the 19th century were slandering each other and assaulting each other, and there was one murder and they ended up in court. It wasn't witchcraft, but underneath it was witchcraft accusations. So it's very important, and that is the kind of historical view. But today's project is kind of moving on from that. And I've also looked at representing, images of witchcraft and art and poetry and drama and journalism, which is ironic because that's what we are doing with a lot of this. But a lot in the past, the representations of witchcraft and the Islandmagee Witches in particular would have been highly gendered and would have been highly politicized, along unionist and nationalist lines. But obviously, our representations are very much, rooted in the objectives of the project, which we'll go through, right? So I'm just going to say where this project came from. It came out of about years of working in public history, giving talks, working with women's groups, TV, but it was dissemination through that. And there was some kind of public collaborative aspect to that, where we shape new histories, but mostly it was me taking my historical research out to the world. And today's project actually was a step change. It started when Victoria and Helen Jackson and Liz Keeley, we all came together to find new ways to get new audiences, but also to deal with the themes that implicitly dealt with before, but bring them out to the light, like gender violence, inclusion, diversity. Okay, and it was at that point, you know, we moved on, and Victoria and I took it forward, and Victoria brought in new CIs or collaborators or co-investigators, along with Dr. Helen Jackson. And you'll hear more about them, Sabrina Minter, Brian Coyle, sorry, and Adam Melvin, and you'll hear about them as I go through. But Victoria also brought in a lot of our students and a lot of the wider staff as well. And we work really well and with Karen Reid as well. So yeah, I'm nearly finished. I'm going to, you know, I've got a couple of other things just to say. So what is it? Today's project, as I said, started in 2019 and it's come to fruition today, and we're launching the website, and it's led by Victoria and myself. And it, as we said before, we're trying to take it to new and international and national audiences. Awareness of this trial has been raised over the years, but we still think it is a part of hidden history. It is dark, hidden history that needs to be taken out there, and a way to discuss these overtly, these key themes that we were talking about: social control and disability inclusion and gender. Okay, so, and what we will be doing, we'll be using new technologies and creative works, a branded interactive digital toolkit website, and we're going to go through each of these elements. Okay, a choice-driven video game. We'll also have a graphic novel, which was co-authored by ourselves, but we're all working, me and Victoria are working through all the elements with different collaborators. We're also doing a virtual reality experience that will bring, you know, what it's like to be bewitched to the audience. And finally, we'll be having a musical score, which also feeds into the video game, but it's a standalone project and so on, right? The last thing I'm just going to say is just quickly is this is timely and relevant, right? So it's a way to bring the idea and the history of the Islandmagee Witches to a wider audience, even wider, and it's also to look at these key themes. But the third way is it's almost an informal commemoration of the Islandmagee Witches themselves, these 8 women and 1 man who were convicted of witchcraft. And it's very timely because it's just at this point where a lot of countries are addressing their witch hunting past. Now, Salem has done it. Lancaster, to a certain extent, 1612 trial has done it. Vardo has done it to a certain extent. The Basque Country did it last year. And Scotland, you might have heard that Nicola Sturgeon made an apology for the witch hunting in Scotland. Now, Scotland was one of the worst in Europe. 2,500 to 3,000 executed, estimated. Now, this is 12 times worse than England, 5 times worse than the European average. So, and it was in huge witch hunts that took, you know, loads of lives. For example, just one example is one village in Perth at one weekend basically killed more witches than at Salem. Salem, it was only 19. I'm saying only 19, but you know, 38 in the whole of US history. But you know more about that than Scotland. So this is where it's very timely. And that's why we want to do this for the Islandmagee Witches as well. And I'll pass you over to Victoria.
Hi folks, Andrew, thanks for the kind of context. So this is where I come in. So I had Andrew's card marked for a while. When I was doing my PhD at Ulster, I was studying how horror films were responding to social concerns and anxieties, the anxieties of war and terrorism after 9/11. And I would attend Andrew's research seminars on witchcraft at the time. And what was really interesting to me is Andrew was the only person I ever met who kind of never spoke about witches with a smile. Because witches for me were kind of magical and these monstrous archetypes that appear on screen. They weren't a kind of false charge and an accusation that caused the torture and death of thousands of people, especially women. And that really got me thinking, and it kind of stuck with me. And it got me thinking about like which other kind of mass crime, even one long past, is it possible to speak of with a smile, you know? And since then, I've kind of written and edited 7 books on film and television, mostly on dark fiction. and kind of horror and its uses in society. And I've learned a lot about how the representations of monsters and the monstrous on screen almost always represent the attitudes and values that are held by a society, and about how dark fiction like our graphic novel or horror can mirror that back to us in really meaningful ways. And actually it can encourage us to reflect on really important issues. So I read Andrew's book from cover to cover and kind of find myself asking, you know, why are we in Northern Ireland still finding ways to keep our distance from this particular, you know, from this particular piece in history, from our own witch trials that happened on our shores that we kind of live and work and walk every day. And yeah, so we need to open the door and to expose that which we're afraid of, really, and that which is hidden, the door to the hidden room that we'd rather ignore. So that's where I come in as a kind of Causeway Coast born and bred, ex-Reformed Presbyterian, come horror scholar, with a fascination, I guess, with those who are cast as monsters in society, those like witches who are given, you know, the very worst seal of shame. So just to talk through a little bit more, just clicking right here. So I just want to kind of cover some of the aims of the project, and Andrew will give you a nod to chip in. So as Andrew explained, what happened at Islandmagee 311 years ago has never been the subject of any museum collection. It's never been a kind of oral history or major folklore project, which sits strangely with me. Not one commemorative plaque marks the memory of these people, who were the vulnerable targets, let's face it, of a kind of good, God-fearing patriarchal society. So what this project does is it unlocks the door to this hidden room about this unique piece of heritage to the public. What we want to do is encourage a really empathetic understanding of the trials, for obvious reasons. Through the project, we also were really keen to engage with people who don't read academic research, who maybe don't have access to it. We're obviously coming up with new ways to examine the past. There's an issue with Islandmagee because, you know, you can't really see the stuff that happened. There's no bricks and mortar, really. So we're trying to shorten the distance between heritage that is hidden from us and the people that are really interested in engaging with it. That might be local people, that might be global visitors, whatever. And yeah, you know, we all kind of recognize that the witch trials, even today in a post-conflict but still divided NI, they do constitute kind of difficult heritage. And yes, we all know that this past is meaningful in the present, but that it's still a little bit contested. So this project, it just kind of goes without saying, this project isn't about us just creating our own representations and histories of the trial and then kind of downloading that on people. It's trying to provide people with the tools for others, I guess, to create their own stories. Andrew, would you have anything else to add to that?
So I think it's not only creating, you know, our representations and new outputs to share this message, but it's also providing the tools, you know, the historical tools and the creative tools for people to create their own histories and to create their own representations in the future. And I think something that we need to just mention as well is that this is all based on, you know, historical fact, and it's historically accurate within, you know, the framework of the medium we're working on, so that the people concerned are treated with respect, and they are treated with respect, and so, you know, as our stories basically.
Yeah, just to talk a little bit about the actual branding of the site. So the site's now live, and if you log into it or you see the banners behind us, you know, it has a look and feel. And this is a collaboration with our students and colleagues, like we mentioned. But what's really interesting is our students and colleagues are we're leading the project, and they are kind of designing and delivering various aspects of the project and collaborating with us. So each strand has academic content, but it also has real value to society. So it's been kind of incredibly rewarding for us, especially to work with our students on this kind of work. So for example, on the actual branding of the project, so what you see on screen, what you see on the site, what you see in the banners behind us, what you see in the merchandise, this was all done by interactive media students at the Coleraine campus. They designed and branded the project as part as their kind of part of their compulsory work with communities, because there's a real strong civic engagement strand on that. So we're kind of really proud of that as well. But just to let Andrew kind of officially introduce you to the site.
So you can see the, very easy web address, w1711.org. This is the digital toolkit, and this is the gateway to the main project outputs. The history, and we'll go through these one at a time, the graphic novel, the original score, the video game, the VR experience. These are prototypes and full versions, and as Victoria said before, we'll be releasing these through the year as we go along, as they're finished. They're all underway, so they will be delivered this year, most of them. And I want to, reiterate just what Victoria was saying, that this is a truly collaborative team effort with the co-investigators, the staff, and the students. We're not working in silos, as we said. We're working together to create something new, and I think that's the collaborative aspect. And it's the multidisciplinary aspect as well that is new, because sometimes disparate, subjects within, universities, that you might think that they're quite close together, like English or history, but how much talking do they do sometimes, between disciplines? And I think that this is one of the strengths of this project.
I think as well, one of the things that kind of stands out to me about the digital toolkit is just the site, the website and its contents contributes to an understanding of history that isn't just reducible to here's the good people, here's the evil people, here's the right and wrong, here's the winners and losers, because Andrew's research as well has so much nuance. So we provide a nuanced perspective. We capture the kind of complexity of things, of the story, of the history. So for example, when I had first met Andrew and I had first heard about the Islandmagee Witches, which was news to me way back probably in 2014, I had the assumption that the witch hunts were simply the result of deep misogyny. And that's not in doubt, of course, but actually things are much more complex than that. There's other drivers, there's the worsening climate, there's the growing economic inequality, there's the tension within communities, Northern Irish neighbours are like. So again, it's just we provide so much room for that nuance and complexity in everything that we do, and I'm kind of really proud of that. Andrew, maybe you touch on the history here.
Yes. I think that all of the outputs, will have a wide, appeal to the general public, to students, to school pupils. I get loads of pupils, especially in the south, asking, can I do a project in this? Where to get the original documents? The project itself is for all these communities, but especially the history aspect would be good for the community and the educational groups. What we will provide there is a gateway all in the one place, so people can look at podcasts or images or radio features and historic newspaper reports and the original documents. A lot of them, things that have been created in the last 10 years as well. So it's the original documents and images, but also, what we have said about it. So it's another way into it, that rather than reading the book, I think the reason why we're here, the book was designed to be accessible as well, but this takes it to another level, I think. And the original documents are being digitized and will be fully searchable. And that's being paid for by a research impact fund from University of Ulster, which Victoria won one as well, and we've used this to carry these elements forward. And they'll be all accessible all on the website,
Yeah, I think, so this is obviously, it's a page called History on the site. I think what I especially like about this particular element of the toolkit, the history section, is that, there's this growing range of tools on there. So there's academic articles, there's podcasts, there's poem, there's episodic television, there's everything on there that you could possibly want to engage with, and all anchored by the lead-in historian on that issue. So for me, it's kind of a no-brainer, couldn't be better. I want to just introduce you to the graphic novel. So we decided that a visual verbal format could really enrich the public's understanding of individuals weighed down and maybe destroyed by the past. So over the past year now, really, would it be a year, we've been producing and writing a supernatural graphic novel. You can see kind of some of the cover art in grayscale here in the back, with an immensely talented illustrator called David Campbell from Derry. And it's about the Islandmagee Witches. So it's about 16 pages, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a heck of a lot. And in the 16 pages, we kind of rehearse and reimagine and replay the darkest moments in this story. And then there's going to be learning materials at the back of that graphic novel. But so it's a supernatural graphic novel. This graphic novel is scary. It really is scary. And why the darkness? Why kind of horror? So for me, this is another kind of no-brainer. Throughout history, horror and dark fiction has been very concerned with the forces that threaten individuals and groups. That's what it does. It's concerned with the workings of power and with repression. And horror, I find, is especially useful for examining the forces that threaten women in particular. And I'm sure it's not news to you that the genre is all about victims, right? So there's a kind of very natural fit there. Also, one of the things that we've really come to terms with is that most of us understand the tools of the trade when it comes to horror. Like, we know a haunted house when we see one. So the panels in the graphic novel and the actual imagery can be read at a glance, you know, and also because it is supernatural, it really engages with our senses. And it's kind of horrifying in its own right. So just to show you a little bit more of the artwork that we're currently working up. So we're now more than 3/4 of the way through finishing the novel. And there's some interesting things that we found. Sorry, I'm just admitting people here to the room, those old latecomers. You're very welcome. So we're now 3/4 of the way through, and here's some of the things we found: that the graphic novel is a kind of open and flexible space. And that says something, you know, it's a site of struggle in itself, and each panel kind of competes with each other. And readers can move forward, they can move backwards, they can move upwards, they can move downwards. So the actual format of the graphic novel suggests that history itself and the story itself is actually fluid and unstable and constructed. So we find that the actual kind of format's really, really interesting. David Campbell, the illustrator, has also kind of very carefully studied old images of Islandmagee, old images of Carrick, the clothes, the people. So there's a really deep level of authenticity. And yet we've also kind of subtly reworked parts of the story to suit the graphic novel format. And I guess what we're trying to do here is present history as slippery and unstable and multivocal, and always meditated by human consciousness. So it's a kind of, I think, to put it in a nutshell, it's a ambitious blend of actuality and fantasy and history and horror and myth and comfort. And we're really excited for you to get your hands on it. And it's going to live on the site under the graphic novel page. Andrew, maybe you can talk a bit about the score.
Well, that was just a wee bit about the graphic novel. I think we tried as well, you know, and the historical reality, you know, I would, you know, work closely with the illustrator to make sure that the period detail, that the facts of the case, that is historically accurate. There's condensing and there's conflation to tell the story, like the Crucible in a lot of ways, and there is the darkness and the supernatural there, but it is the story of the Islandmagee Witches, and it's closely based and possessed with the devil. So it's a beautiful, for me, balance between history and imagination and art and supernatural as well. And I think the point of view that we took in this, and this is where the horror is from Mary Dunbar. Now, Mary Dunbar is, says that she saw all these things and people cooperated, can never say that word. People see it, right, as well. they were there and they saw this. And what we're trying to get across, and this is something that I find very hard to get across to my students, and something I've tried to do in my work as well, is that people really believed in witchcraft. It wasn't just, oh, we're using it as a scapegoat to get rid of people, or I don't really believe in this, you know, I'm just going to accuse somebody or I'm going to prosecute or execute. No, this is whole communities who believe in magic. They believe in the occult. They believe in the devil, the earthly power of the devil, and they believe in demonic possession, and they believe in witchcraft. And this is what we're trying to get you. We're trying to plunge you into the world, you know, of belief in witchcraft, so that you know what it was like to live then. And I think living history should do that. And I think the graphic novel is very good at doing that. And just to talk about the original score, and this is working closely with Adam Melvin, who is designing the score, and it orchestrates the noises associated with the Islandmagee witch trial. It shows once again the different ways that we can relate the story in an innovative way and in a new way to engage with other audiences. The score features abstract field recordings from Islandmagee to imply that the landscape is active and observing and waiting. And, you know, and you also see other projects he's working on as well.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting for me about the score, I mean, we know from the theory that sound has a direct impact on human emotion, like we all know that. But what it does is sound also sharpens brand image and it kind of enhances recognition. So across the world, we can see that the uniqueness of dark history sites can be used as to create a kind of brand sound that represents the dark elements associated with each of those sites. So, and I think the point is, like, people can't turn off their hearing. So when it comes to delivering messages, I think sound has a real advantage over visuals, and that's why. And Adam is not only kind of designing the score, but then also carrying that over into some of the ambience for the VR, which we'll talk about in just a second. So I want to just give you a quick introduction to the video game. So we are developing an open first-person hunt game that takes place in 18th century County Antrim in NI, obviously, with our game design colleagues at the Belfast Art College, so with Brian Coyles and Sabrina Minter from Ulster. So what the player does is the player takes the role of Edward Clemens, and this is Ulster's own main witch hunter during the 1711 trial, as he searches for clues in the hope of chasing down suspected witches. So the geographical setting of the game is kind of historically accurate, and the game also features, you know, supernatural elements. So just to give you a little bit more on the game, and if you're hit with sound here, don't blame me. There we go. Just going to turn that down for a second. So this is a little bit of the game that hopefully you can see kind of in front of you. In the game, the player must kind of contemplate whether they're going to use evidence and empathy, or if you're going to pursue in-game rewards. So you get in-game rewards if you convict a suspect, because you grow in status, you grow in financial reward. But the curve of the actual game mechanics is designed in a way that causes you, the player, to reflect with compassion when you encounter suspects of witchcraft. So essentially you are encouraged to think about the ways in which culture and societal pressure kind of molds us as individuals, which is a concept, you know, that's really difficult to grasp when you're actually steeped in that culture. So again, Andrew, would you have anything to say about the video game?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting for me, I mean, Edward Clements was a real person, and he was actually reacting. He was the justice of the peace, and it was his working within the common law system to investigate the witch accusations of Mary Dunbar. So he was a real figure. You know, there was a wee bit of, you know, a change to bring you into the immersive reality of the game, but there is a real balance again between historical reality and gameplay. And I think this, for me, reiterates the fact, right? These are not just bad people, Edward Clements. It's actually a complex operation, morally and legally and emotionally, to react to a witchcraft accusation. And they didn't just take any evidence at face value. They looked into it in the Islandmagee case and they weighed it up. And, you know, but the whole weight of the community was against these women, and he had to uphold the law. So I think it puts you in the kind of the vulnerable position that you're in if you have to investigate a witch trial. So that's what really interesting for me as a historian.
Absolutely, Andrew. Thanks for that. Folks, going to just introduce you to the fifth and final part of the digital toolkit that will live on the site as well. So this is the VR experience. So we're working really closely with Dr. Helen Jackson from Interactive Media at Ulster. And Helen's research is all about kind of bringing intangible cultural heritage to wider audiences through things like AR and VR, so through tech. So Connected NI, who you saw their little logo at the start, they're actually paying for the build of this app. And we're working with a Northern Ireland company called Centerrail. I'm sure you've kind of heard of them. They're leading the way in VR. And what we're doing is creating a VR experience around the Islandmagee Witch trials. So obviously we want this to be kind of educational. We want it to be enjoyable, but we also want the app, you know, to serve as a powerful tool for getting across messages. For us, it's really important that this kind of heritage that's staged around sites associated with tragedy, that it's used to explain, I guess, how and why this tragedy occurred, and that it's used to kind of impress upon the visitor or the user the importance of avoiding such events in the future. So I think as well, what really stands out for me about the VR app or the VR experience, and which will maybe affect kind of visitors or users who want to engage with that area, if we're to kind of embrace this history and tell this story, I think it could change people's perspectives and change people's impressions about certain places and spaces in Northern Ireland, you know, that are known for being a little bit isolated, or some people assume they're a bit conservative. And I think when places reckon with their role in kind of those histories and marginalizing people in the past, then others can assume that this space and place might actually be more inclusive than we thought. It might actually be embracing of all. So a little tiny bit more on the VR before we tell you how you can actually use this stuff. We've created a VR experience that takes the user to the old Presbyterian meeting house, the kind of church space in Islandmagee. And this part of the VR is a kind of virtual training room. So you'll be able to sit there and learn about the trials through video, through sound, maybe through sermons. All kinds of stuff can happen in that room, the room on the left, the kind of meeting house. But you also have the option then, if you're brave enough, of stepping through the curtain on the left, which takes you out onto the cliff edge, where we've kind of did a 3D model of the rocking stone that overlooks Browns Bay, where one of the witches was said to have left claw marks, said to have left claw marks as she was dragged off the court. So here the user can actually engage with various objects while seated around the rock. And to cut a long story short, each object, once it's interactive with, has various consequences. So in other words, depending on what you act with, you'll experience firsthand what it feels like to be accused of a witch in 1711. You'll also be able to experience being bewitched. So you might levitate, etc., etc. I don't want to give too much away.
Yeah.
But this will include visual effects, ambient sound, and voiceover recordings. And those voiceover recordings are actually scripted from the original documents. I was in the sound recording studio last Friday with my cinematic art students, and they were, you know, putting on their best Scottish accent and recording these voice recordings. So it's an incredible thing, really. And I think the last note I'll say on it is, I think the overall kind of oral environment, because a lot of this is through sound, dramatizes how social life in rural communities and settings can be characterized by powerful and sometimes poisonous social relations, you know. So there's some issues of visibility and surveillance. So for example, you might hear whispers on the right, and as soon as you kind of turn to the right, then they stop and they start up again on the left. And it's just really interesting stuff. Would you have anything to add about the VR app, Andrew?
Yes. I would just say, you know, I mean, see if you look on, you know, I was just looking there, you know, if you look on the very last image, you know, it's the rocking stone, and that is in the early 20th century, or late 19th, early 20th century. And during the day, you know, people got their well-to-do boys there, get their picture, you know, taken of it. But at night it became something else. People avoided it tonight. There were stories and actually about the Islandmagee Witches dancing on it. And you get this throughout the 19th century, and the folklore and the oral tradition. So you know, when I was thinking about where should we do this, and that was just immediately what I thought, and it was one of the witches, Catherine McCollum, who was meant to have been dragged off that, you know. So it is, you know, it became almost not public history, almost folk history, you know, where people remembered the Islandmagee witches in the community of Islandmagee through places like that. They avoided also the house that you probably seen earlier, and No Head House, they would avoid that at night. So, and I think by incorporating the training room element, as you can see in the other place, what you actually, it's a balance again between historical explanation and the facts and an experience that plunges you once more into this world where witchcraft is real. You know, I know that Julian Goodyear, who's a historian of Scotland, he says to his students when he was introducing these witchcraft module, I heard on a podcast, welcome to Middle Earth, you know, because that's what you're plunging into a world where the supernatural all around you, you know, doing good and bad things is a reality. And this is what the VR does, and it does it very well, I think.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I got from your book, Andrew, was just, you know, how these were sincerely held beliefs, you know, and the belief was very strong, and it's yeah, I think the VR does that well. Yeah, absolutely. So how can you benefit from this toolkit? Andrew, do you want to read through a couple there, and I'll read through a couple?
Yeah, okay. In terms of audiences, I think the resources will address with specialist interests in, you know, the Islandmagee Witches, whether this is an individual level, an academic level, a general interest level on it. And just doing this stuff over the last 10 years, there's a huge amount of interest in witchcraft, obviously, but in the hidden story of Irish witchcraft, you know. And it'll access digital tools that will help you to interpret this history as well, and the stories that surround witch trials. And we said students, place visitors, tourism, because I mean, if you go to the places, you can just get this up on your phone and find out really quickly about it, listen to something, look at something, you know, and also learn about and facilitating the Islandmagee story itself, you know, and issues, as we said, throughout this of gender and equality, of diversity, disability, inclusivity, and social marginalisation. I say disability because, you know, I'm working on something this minute, you know, on how disabled people or people with physical disabilities were sometimes, you know, singled out as witches, and it's been, you know, overlooked to a certain extent. And many of the Islandmagee witches had a physical disability.
Yeah, I think we're also kind of hoping to provide some insight for those that are seeking guidance on how to implement, you know, interpretation methods specific to very dark or difficult stories or dark histories. So we're interested in how traumatic events are remembered and forgotten and then kind of informally commemorated. And we're obviously kind of working our way through that space ourselves. We also want to gain an insight from our use of immersive technologies, you know, like what kind of solutions can they provide if the cultural heritage that we want to represent isn't actually really there, or if it's hidden or supernatural. And I guess what's most important is we want to promote empathy and understanding. And all of these kind of, whether you're reading a graphic novel or you're tuning into the sound of the VR or whatever, they're all perspective taking tasks. And we have worked so hard to maintain authenticity and integrity every single step of the way. So whilst we're kind of telling a complex and unsettling story, but it's been, you know, an absolute pleasure to kind of bring this, I guess, project to you. It's been a long time coming, hasn't it, Andrew?
Well, I mean, you know,
for you longer.
Well, I mean, I've been working, you know, dissemination for a long time, but this project, you know, it's great to see elements that started a few years ago come into fruition after, you know, a few years, you know. Obviously, like everybody else in the world, COVID didn't help. But yeah. We're getting there.
But I guess now we could open the floor up to some questions. We can hear you if you turn on your mic, or you could just tap them into the, you could tap your words into the, sorry, you could chat or comment in the chat box.